Hello and welcome to this new episode of Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers podcast. For those of you who are new to this show, I'm Matilda and I'm your host. I'm an inner transformation mentor supporting women in healing mother wounds through women's circles and through the one-on-one 10 weeks program. To know more about these offerings, check out my website, womenreclaimingtheirfullness.me. Now, after the episode on triangulation of 2 weeks ago, I've received a lot of emails from you sharing your experience with me, and I am so grateful, first of all, for your trust in sharing your experience with me. That's always precious, and I get how vulnerable it is to do that. So I really appreciate your trust. And I'm grateful for your help too. Every time you courageously share your experience with me, you give me the opportunity to support hundreds of women who have been through the same. So thank you for that. I mentioned in the emails that I would do a series on triangulation, and here we are. That's what we're doing today. We're beginning that series. Now, if you're not yet subscribed to the newsletter, so you didn't know I was going to do that, and would like to be up to date with what's happening in the world of women reclaiming their fullness, you can subscribe today. The link is in the description of the episode. As I was saying, this episode is part of the series on triangulation, where we're going to explore many aspects of it with a narcissistic mother, see how it works, where she triangulates the most. I'm going to bring forward all the main experiences that I've seen in my own work, in my own experience, and also the ones that you've been sharing with me through your beautiful emails. So if you're hearing this now for the first time and you want to send me an email sharing what your experience with triangulation has been like, you're welcome to do so. My email is matilde@womenreclaimingtheirfullness.me. So today we're going to talk about how a narcissistic mother triangulates between her children, creating devastating effects in the relationship among siblings. This dynamic was actually number one in the emails you sent me. Many of you have experienced this. I certainly have. And for those who don't have siblings, some of you actually shared in your emails how this toxic dynamic happened with cousins who were close in age and who you were close to. So that although you didn't have siblings, that kind of happened with whatever was the next person that could be as close to you as a sibling would. So it still applies. As you know from the introduction episode on triangulation, and if you haven't yet, make sure to listen to episode 80, 14 signs of triangulation with your narcissistic mother and your number one defense. So if you haven't listened to that, I invite you to listen to it, as I'm not going to repeat the same things with these episodes. So it may help you clarify some points. But if you have listened to that episode, you already know this is a toxic dynamic, and that the triangulation is actually the favorite go-to of a narcissistic mother. She uses it to divide and conquer, to create chaos, and to break relationships so that she can better control people around her and meet her own needs. She will do this among her children, treating her children differently and pitting them against each other in a subtle or not so subtle way. In the previous episode on triangulation, you've heard me mentioning the roles of scapegoat, golden child, and invisible child. These are the roles a narcissistic mother gives to her children with the way she treats them, and they are important to understand when we look at dynamics between siblings. Of course, a narcissistic mother will give one of these roles to an only child too. But this is a dynamic I will perhaps talk to in a different episode. So before we go into the signs of triangulation by a narcissistic mother between her children, as I mentioned, as it is in the title, I have 5 signs that I want to share with you today. And also we're going to talk about how to stop this now, because this triangulation between children starts when you're all small, at a very young age, but the effects, and it can continue on, the effects continue throughout your entire life and relationship with your siblings when you're an adult, but also your mother might still actually be doing that today. So we're going to talk about how to stop that what can you do, what you can do, because there's stuff that you can do to stop that happening now. So we're going to talk about all of that. But before we do that, it's really important to understand these three roles: the scapegoat, golden child, and invisible child. So I will briefly explain them just for those who may not be familiar with these terms. I know if you have listened to podcasts and shows and maybe research maternal narcissism, you've probably come across these terms before. But in case you haven't, I just want to briefly explain what I mean when I say scapegoat, golden child, and invisible child. So the scapegoat child is the one who takes the blame for everything in the family, within the family dynamic. They are constantly criticized, humiliated, and they can do no right. There's no way they can do something right in the eyes of their narcissistic mother or other member of their family. They take the brunt of the narcissistic mother's frustration and rage. They're often labeled as the black sheep of the family, the one that disrupts the peace, the one that if only they weren't born, things would be better. That's the scapegoated child. And you can have more than one within the family dynamic. The golden child is the crown prince or princess, the one that with their successes brings glory to the family. A golden child can do no wrong in the eyes of the narcissistic mother, and often they are the only one able to talk to her and somehow manage her. They are given everything they want in order to fulfill their mighty destiny, which represents the narcissistic mother's perfect image of herself and her aspirations. So she will tend to live her dreams, the ones that she didn't get to, through her golden child. And the invisible child, this child is the neglected one, forgotten about. Neither praise nor blame, just given enough to survive and nothing more. Don't mind that one. She stays or he stays in their room all day. We don't hear about them. They blend in with the walls, kind of thing. So now this was just a brief intro, and much more can be said about these roles. And I don't have episodes on these roles on this podcast yet, but I will in the future for sure do something like that. In the meantime, can you recognize yourself in any of them? You can share your experience with me on this, and also if you have any further questions on this. Sometimes you can straight away go, oh yes, I know exactly which role I had, and sometimes things can be a little bit more blurry around the edges, as in the roles mightn't be as defined and as recognizable for you, which is okay too. It took me a long time to understand what my role was, because dynamics within a family can be quite complex. So again, if you have any questions, reach out. But how does all this ties in with triangulation? A narcissistic mother will indirectly use these roles while talking to her child about the other siblings. So the scapegoat, for example, will always hear the praises for the golden child. The scapegoat will also be reminded of their shortcomings and failures with comparisons to the golden child's successes and merits. The golden child will hear awful things about the scapegoat, and they will be taught to despise the other sibling, or maybe more than one, as there can be more than one scapegoats in the family. So the golden child is going to hear, oh, did you hear what they did? And oh, it's always them, and the blame is always going to fall on them. So the golden child is also going to be taught to blame the scapegoated child or children for whatever happens. It's gonna sort of mirror the behavior of the narcissistic mother to keep in the good graces, to keep that golden child position. They will have to behave like the mother does, and so they'll also can become part of that dynamic of scapegoating the other siblings. The invisible child will be spoken of as someone who doesn't count, who should not be listened to or even bothered with. So this is just to give some example. In this type of family dynamic, the narcissistic mother is the central point of every interaction. So if you remember the episode on triangulation, we spoke about how this can look like a triangle, literally, where the narcissistic mother is at the apex, and then you have like the other two people within the triangulation are in the bottom corners of the triangle. In this dynamic, because we can have more siblings, so it may be like that triangulation triangle still works when we're taking two siblings at the time. So she's using it between one and another in specific situations. But if you look at the entire dynamic of the family, your mother is like in the center of it, and it's like each sibling is directly connected to the mother and communicating with her individually, but there's very little healthy communication amongst the siblings together with each other. So she is coordinating everything. And that is the cause then as to why children are progressively torn apart from each other, pitted one against the other, taught to compete for the mother love and attention from the very beginning, from a very young age. The children relate more and more with the mother individually and less with one another. So they end up not truly knowing each other, while believing the version the mother gives them as truth about the others. I've had emails of listeners saying, for years I didn't even know my sister. I just thought she was the speakable person, that she was this and that she was that. And then I realized actually this was what my mother was telling me about her. Or my brother, I believed he was useless and he was just good for nothing and he was just this and that, whatever. But actually that was the version. When we stop and think, when we stop and go, where does that come from actually? Is it really true? Did I really witness that person being like that? Or is it just the version I've received from my mother? That's the question. So what's the result of all of this? You may have grown up hating your siblings, or not getting on at all, or barely knowing them, and barely having a relationship. And this may very well all be caused by your narcissistic mother. Had she treated you equally and with love, much could be different now. And you may feel a grief about this. And I get it if you do. I definitely have in my own family with my own sister. In my family, I've witnessed it actually everywhere. It's a big Italian family. And at some points, we were really a lot of people living in the same house. A very big family. And there were many sets of parents with children, and everywhere where there were sets of parents with children, there were strong elements of this going on. There was always like the favorite child, and then the ones that was blamed for everything, and the one that just blended in with the walls. So personally, I've experienced it on myself in two distinct dynamics. I was raised a lot by my grandmother on my mother's side, and she would treat me, my sister and our mother, as if we were all siblings. My mother has been referred often as being like a sister for me, and my grandparents would often call themselves mom and dad in front of me. So within this dynamic, I was the golden child, my mother was the scapegoat, and my sister was the invisible child. And then there was the other dynamic, which was the triangle between my mother, my sister, and I. And in that, I still realize after years of trying to unpack this, because the role was a little bit less defined there, was a little bit harder to understand. I still was the golden child, although it was a very precarious position. It would take very, very little for me to go down to being scapegoated by my mother anyways. But it was still, there were shades of golden child, and my sister instead was more like the scapegoat. So, and I had no idea that any of this was happening. I had no awareness this was even a thing. I had never heard those terms. I didn't know about maternal narcissism, and I believed everything I was told, especially by my mother, which I always wanted to be seen by, and I wanted validation and approval and love. She was always away. She was neglecting us a lot. So clearly I sought her out a lot and wanted to be loved by her. So I believed anything she told me. And this has created a lot of conflict and suffering. And for years, I had near to no relationship with my sister, which was actually in my childhood the most important person in my life. And then, thankfully, afterwards, things have gotten better. But I had a one-on-one contact with my mother for years, and she would be the one reporting about my sister. So I could be like literally months at the time, if not like an entire year, from birthday to birthday, never talking to my sister directly and knowing about her only from what my mother would say, which was her version, of course, and not a very flattering one a lot of the time. So I am fortunate that since I got awareness of what was going on, my relationship with my sister has actually greatly improved. And she is the person of my family of origin that I love and care about the most. So that's I feel blessed with that. But I know that this is not everyone's experience. Often the break created by a narcissistic mother triangulating between her children is not so easy to repair, and it may never actually be repaired. And I get that. So let's go into what are the 5 signs of triangulation between siblings, so that you can actually look and see, okay, this is actually what was happening. And you can, if you're still unsure if this is really what's happening, you can keep an eye out for these signs. And also, these are the things that you want to stop happening. So if you recognize that these patterns are still going on in your life right now with your narcissistic mother, then those are the things that you want to put an end to with boundaries. So the first sign is comparisons. If your narcissistic mother compares you with your siblings, and does that a lot, compares siblings with one another all the time, sort of like, if only you could be like your brother more, or look at your sister, she's so much prettier than you, or look at the way they do this, you will never be able to achieve the same. Look at their career, you're never going to be able to do that. Or maybe look at your career is so much better than the one of your siblings. Whatever comparison that puts one down and puts the other one up, whether the one that is being put down is you or the other, doesn't matter. It's still comparison. So it's still triangulation, and it's still a toxic dynamic, even if you're the one that is being praised in the comparison. And this, I know this, if you're seeking validation from your mother, which I know we do, is very natural, this may actually feel momentarily good. And I get that. I really do. There's no judgment here. I've been there. But it's still triangulation, and it is still a toxic dynamic that is still gonna destroy the relationship between you and your other siblings. Number 2, if you've observed very different ways of treating the children. So like a different tone being used as speaking with the different children, sort of referring to one, or you go upstairs, you've been bad, and talking at the other, oh no, of course you can do whatever you want and you can watch TV for as long as you like. And still nowadays that you can even tell by the tone, oh, I can tell by the tone that my mother is about to talk about my brother or whatever, that there is that shift in tone. I know it. When my grandmother talks about my mother, there is a shift in tone. It's immediate. Like I don't even need to hear what she's about to say. I know where she's going. And I now have learned to stop that immediately, because it's not positive, whatever's going to come out of her mouth. But there's a tone, and it changes, and you can tell. The third sign is gossiping about the sibling that isn't there. So you could be having a one-on-one meeting with your mother, and all of a sudden she goes, let me tell you the latest about your sister or brother. You wouldn't even imagine what they have done this time or what they're up to. Did you know what they have been saying? Or, anything like that. Any gossip that is about one of your siblings and they're not present. They're not there. Because if she was recounting something and everyone is at the dinner table and everyone is happy about her telling the story, that's okay. But when it's done behind the back, clearly on purpose, I said it in the 14 signs of triangulation. If your mother tries to catch you alone to be able to talk about someone else, that's a very, very clear sign of triangulation. Okay, so if she's trying to catch you alone to talk about your siblings and gossip about them, that's triangulation. That no good is going to come out of that ever. Sign number 4 is children having to compete for love and attention from the mother. Okay, so as we said, there's a favorite child, that's the golden child, and then there's the others, and there's this constant need to compete. You've been taught indirectly, maybe, or directly, that you have to compete among each other for recognition, for validation, for love, for attention, all things, for attachment. Ultimately, the attachment that is so, so important when we grow up. Attachment is very, very fundamental need of a child, because it's related to survival. If we don't have attachment, in nature we would be dead. So that instinct is very, very strong, and so we fight for that attachment. We shouldn't be fighting for that attachment. That is just what maternally in a situation that doesn't have all this trauma, doesn't have a mother with a lot of trauma, doesn't have a mother unaware and emotionally unavailable, we wouldn't be fighting for the attachment. But with a narcissistic mother, we definitely end up fighting for that. And so this competing for love and attention, and it can be done quite directly as well. Like your mother could have said things like this to you, sort of like, oh, if you do this for me, I will love you more than the others. She could have used words like this. You are, or something like, you're the only one who gets me. I couldn't do without you, but I could do it. I could definitely do without the others, but I couldn't do without you. That's an incredibly pressurizing and horrible position to be put in, and I speak from experience because I get that all the time with my family. They could do without everyone else, but it's always me that they couldn't do without, and that was very, very, very intense. If you are listening and you are a golden child, you know what I'm talking about. So anything, directly or indirectly, that you can go back and go, oh, actually, yes, that was my experience. I had to compete to be seen. I had to get the best results. I had to do whatever she asked. I had to stay there holding her hand all night. Whatever it was, your version, because we all had different experiences, that is the representation of having to compete for getting love and attention, and trying to best your siblings at that, trying to be better than them. And the final one, number 5, you've observed this dynamic that your mother is like the central point and coordinator of every dynamic and interaction between the children. So she could tell you things like, don't trust any of them. I'm the only person you can trust. I'm the only one on your side. They're not on your side, but I'm the only one that is actually on your side in this. So you should listen to me. I am the only one who knows you. They don't really know you, which is probably true because she didn't allow that to happen. But they don't really know you. I am the only one that knows you. So you just keep relating one-on-one with me, because that's the only safe way to relate in this family. And I'll deal with your siblings myself on your account. So not to worry. So that would be like the dynamic of that. So if you have experienced any of this, you know how hurtful it all is. And you're very much not alone in this. And as I mentioned, many of you have reached out with emails where you spoke to this dynamic. Many of you having siblings have witnessed that in your family. So I know that when we don't communicate with one another, we may think this has only happened to me, but actually it hasn't. I got loads of emails. And also, I am one of the people that has been through this, so you're not alone. You may have been the one who was scapegoated, maybe, and who lived in the shadow of their high and mighty other sibling, constantly feeling like having to compete for a bit of love, for the scraps, maybe, and that never even came. Or you may have been the favorite child, raised with the constant pressure not to disappoint and taught to blame your other sibling for everything, not to lose the very conditional love you were getting, because the love a golden child gets is very conditional. Or you may have grown up being invisible, resenting the attention the others got and learning to suffer in silence and keep it all inside yourself, which is also very hurtful. So share which was your experience. You can send me an email or drop a comment to let us know. And again, I get it. None of these experiences is pleasant, and it's very, very hurtful. And it's also very natural that this has an impact in the way your relationship with your siblings is now, today. Growing up with a narcissistic mother who triangulates between her children may have created such a rift in your relationship with your siblings that may feel impossible now to heal. You could actually be listening to this and going, there is no way I'm ever even gonna try and get on with my siblings, or maybe one of them. And I get that. It also very much depends on the level of awareness of everyone involved, because if you may have done all this work, you may have looked into maternal narcissism and all of that, and maybe your siblings haven't. They're still under the spell and they have no awareness. And sometimes it's possible to try and talk about it and introduce the topic, and sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it really doesn't. So that's just very personal, and it depends on the situation. But one thing for sure is, whether you would like to heal the relationship with your siblings or not, the most important healing is the one that happens inside of you, because that's what we're here for. This is the important part. And then from there, I've actually seen miracle occur, like relationships that seemed absolutely unsavable, when the person is doing the necessary inner work to heal themselves. Sometimes things shift that we were not even able to expect, and in a positive way. Now, I'm not saying that this happens all the time, because it doesn't. I would be lying if I said that, but it can happen. So definitely is about you. This is the most important thing. Never do this work because you're hoping to heal a relationship with your brother or your sister, but it's about you, because the more you heal yourself, the more you understand these dynamics within yourself, the more you go through the grief and you accept that and you process that, and the more your life improves. Because these traumatic experiences, because going through triangulation with your siblings by your narcissistic mother is a traumatic experience. This traumatic experience have an impact on your everyday life. They also impact the way you now relate, perhaps at work, you relate with your friends, the way you may be guarded, or the way you may be pleasing others and stuff like that. So that's why healing within you is the most important thing. So a lot can change for the better when you understand triangulation dynamics within your family, when you understand that your mother did all this only to meet her own needs, and that none of what she said about you or your siblings is the truth. Okay, this is really important to understand. None of what she said was the truth, and even what she's saying now isn't the truth. She's not the holder of the truth. She's just giving you whatever version that helps her meet her needs and that helps her staying in control. That's all she's doing. You're not the role your narcissistic mother gave you. You're not. That's really important. And that is actually one of the reasons why I haven't yet done episodes on this golden child, scapegoat, and invisible child, because very often we tend to take them on as, okay, this is who I am. And the more we get defined into this role, this can have like a bit of a counterproductive result. We become, like I've heard a lot of clients have come in with very defined ideas of what their role was, and they kind of stuck to it. It becomes almost like an identity that we get attached to, subconsciously, of course, we don't mean to. So it's really important. I'm gonna say it again. You're not the role your narcissistic mother gave you. You're not. And the same goes for your siblings. They are not the roles their narcissistic mother gave them. You weren't born a golden child, a scapegoat, or an invisible child. You weren't born any of those things. She plastered that label on you indirectly. It's not like a narcissistic mother ever calls us those names. It's just the way she treats us. But we weren't born like that. Okay, so you are not that role. So how can you stop this triangulation dynamic in your life now? Gonna give you like a few points that you can implement today so that this stops. First, don't engage. Okay, this is like we spoke about it even in the general episode. The number one defense is not engaging. And I know that sometimes that can be very challenging, but that is still remains a very, very important way to go about this. Don't engage in any conversation with your mother regarding your siblings. That's it. Set a strong boundary there. What you can say is something along these lines. I will not talk about my sister with you. If you continue, I will end the conversation. That's it. You can use the boundary setting roadmap to set your boundaries on this. Follow it, like literally use the roadmap, and you can journal. This is an exercise that really works. If you're unsure how to set this boundary, you use the roadmap and you journal or you write down the scenario that you know you're going to have to set this boundary, because your mother, you know when your mother comes on the attack on this topic, when she's more likely to talk about your siblings with you and stuff. So you prepare, which is step one of the boundary setting roadmap, is to prepare. And so you prepare by planning it and by following step by step the roadmap. So you have the scenario, you're prepared, you know what you're going to say, you know what you're not going to say, you know where you're willing to go and where you're not willing to go, and you know what consequences you're going to give and all of that. You prepare yourself that way. So if you haven't downloaded the free roadmap to boundary setting yet, you can do that today by following the link in the description of this episode. I really invite you to do that, because setting boundaries is so fundamental with a narcissistic mother, and yet is one of the most challenging things. And I know that. I get it. So having such a clear roadmap, an easy to follow roadmap, it's a massive help. Since I created that, I've seen incredible results with the people that have used it. So go ahead and download that. So that's the first thing. The first point, don't engage. Set your boundary. Anytime your mother starts talking about one of your siblings that is not there, you're just not gonna go there. That's it. Second point, this is if at all possible. As we said, sometimes it's not, but if at all possible, speak to your siblings directly, skipping your narcissistic mother. You know that dynamic, her in the center and everyone talking one-on-one with her, but no one talking with one another. You gotta stop that dynamic. Someone has to start stopping that dynamic. You can't control what your siblings are gonna keep on doing, but you can choose what you are gonna do. And you can set the tone. So this will remove, if you start speaking directly with your siblings, this will remove her from the role of coordinator and controller of all relationships. It could be as simple as planning a family gathering, for example, where she says that she will communicate to your siblings herself. You know, like she could be like, oh, you don't worry about calling them and telling them what they need to do to prepare for this family gathering. I'll do that. Don't let her, as in, well, she can go ahead and do it, whatever. You can't stop her. But what you can do is beat her to it and talk to your siblings yourself, with or without informing her. Maybe you could say, oh, don't worry, mom, I'll do it, because maybe that's available to you. Or maybe it's not. I know that if I did that, probably that would actually get my mother to move quicker than me. So in the attempt to keep her role, so I'd keep quiet. That's my own personal experience. It very much depends on your situation, and every situation is different. But in general, with or without informing her, go speak direct to your siblings, because that communication is going to be clean and clear. You can keep it clean and clear, where your mother is going to use it as an excuse to triangulate. Or it could be something like, your sister has a huge problem, something terrible has happened to her, or your brother, whatever, fill the blank. Let me tell you all about it. And you go, no thanks, I will speak to her myself. I don't need to hear it from you. I'm gonna hear it directly from her. And then you call your sister or your brother and you go directly to them to hear what the problem was, if you're concerned. If you know your mother is just talking nonsense because she does that, then you don't even need to do that. But I know my mother would inflate things to such a degree that was like ridiculous. And then I'd be like all worried and contacting my sister, and then she'd be like, no, there was nothing actually that happened. So again, lies in triangulation are very common. Inflating things is very common. But the point remains, if at all possible, in any situation where your mother goes, I'll take care of talking to your siblings for you, you just go no, and you go speaking directly with your siblings. Point number 3, gain awareness of the triangulation dynamic in your family, which you're doing right now, and you can then listen to this again and again, pause, feel into what your experience has been. So the more awareness you gain, then you can use your awareness to change your behavior accordingly. And this can already bring a lot of healing. You may or may not be able to speak to your siblings about maternal narcissism and triangulation, and about what went on in your childhood. So this, again, we said it, this depends on their openness to the conversation and to their level of awareness. And you can't control that. If it feels possible to you at all, try and talk to them, because a lot of healing can happen then. So try and share the awareness that you're gaining with them, if that feels possible. If that feels unsafe and not possible, if they're not open and they tell you they don't want to know, well, then there's nothing you can do about that. You can keep, though, set your boundaries not to engage, and you can keep skipping your mothers in conversation with your siblings. You can still do that. That's your choice. I mean, even if they want to be enmeshed and tangled and messed up, you can still do that. You can still not engage every time that your mother wants to talk about them. All of those remain in your control. And you can still gain as much awareness as you need for yourself, because it's going to help you, whether you can talk about it with them or not. Number 4, this is something I've seen happen quite a bit. So avoid forming alliances against one particular sibling, especially if this is set up by the narcissistic mother, which very often that's what happens. Okay. This can happen. There can be alliances of all against one, or there can be alliances like if there's a very big family that has a lot of siblings, there's like 2 factions. Some take the mother's side, maybe some take the dad's side, or whatever, are like 2 or 3 against the other 2 or 3. It just gets really messy, and the mother there, the narcissistic mother, thrives in that. That chaos is something that she's like, yeah, I can meet my own needs, I can control everyone. It suits her. So to take that away from her, to take that role of coordinating, dividing and conquering, creating chaos, is refuse to do that. Remain neutral. Keep talking to everyone, and if some of your siblings is not available to talk, that's okay, it's their choice, but don't do it because your mother said so, kind of thing. I have witnessed this in a family of 4 siblings, where the mother had them all against one sister. Now, this was not any of my clients. This was years and years ago, a family I have been part of for a few years because of my boyfriend. But it was, and you could, the sister wasn't the most pleasant person to be around, and that's okay. But for sure, the mother's behavior towards her had a lot to do about that, had a lot to do with that. And she had turned everyone against her. It was pretty intense to witness. Even not particularly being fond of her, I could see how hurtful that was as a dynamic. So it's never a helpful dynamic. It's no good is gonna come out of it, and it's gonna cause a lot of suffering. So if you can at all, avoid that for yourself, because it's ultimately gonna cause suffering to you, because somehow it's gonna come back to you. Like, I mean, that's a conflict and a discontent and a disharmony that is gonna be within your family all the time. Every family gathering, if you weddings and birthdays and celebrations and things, that's always gonna be there. So again, by not engaging, by speaking directly to the person as much as possible, by not triangulating and gossiping, you can do a lot to improve the situation. First of all for yourself, and then for everyone else involved by consequence. And the fifth and final point of what you can do to stop this triangulation is be aware that sometimes this is actually maybe more a point of awareness than an actual point to stop this, but sometimes a sibling can become narcissistic in their way to survive the narcissistic mother. Okay, this is important to understand, because you may have been listening to this episode and going, oh, but like relating with my brother or sister is absolutely impossible. They are as narcissistic as my mother is. And you're not seeing things. This can actually happen. It's very unfortunate and very sad to witness, but it can happen. The golden child can develop narcissistic traits that can be more grandiose, and they can tend to be more similar to maybe the way the narcissistic mother did behave, because they're the one that have been pleasing her all the time, they've been relating with her all the time, they've had to fight to keep that position of favorite child. So that can happen. And the scapegoat can become more of a vulnerable narcissist. The scapegoat can tend to fall into the whole victim role kind of thing, and get a bit self-absorbed to the fact that, I mean, they've suffered so much and it becomes all about them that way. So now this is not a rule, of course. That's not necessarily what happens, but it's what can happen, especially when there is a point blank refusal to see the mother for what she is. So, if they don't want to accept the fact that there is narcissism within the mother, they mightn't see it in themselves. There's dynamics like that. So again, this is something that if you were working one-on-one, we'd be seeing case by case, and it's very different, and we all have our personal unique situations, but it's something that is important to be aware of. This can be very intense to experience, and by being aware of this, you can set potent boundaries to keep yourself protected. So the same boundaries that you would set with your mother, you would start setting also with your siblings, because they're probably also, if that's where they're gonna be triangulating too. And they're gonna try and keep you in the role that you had in the family growing up, for example. They'll be very attached to those roles because that is what keeps their story going. So if you were the scapegoat, they're gonna try and keep you there. Possibly if you were invisible, they're gonna try to keep you there. Or even if you were the favorite, they're gonna try and keep blaming you for that if they were the scapegoated one. So there's things like that can happen, and it's important to be aware of it. And again, same things. Don't engage, set your boundaries. And if you can try and talk to them about it. Now, if they're gone very narcissistic, they mightn't really accept talking about it. So that, again, depends on the degree of narcissism that is present. But definitely, the not engaging and setting boundaries, it's remains always the number one and most powerful defense against triangulation pretty much in every dynamic. So I hope this was helpful. Again, dynamics between siblings, a lot can be said about that. So please reach out if you have more questions on this, if you want to share your experience on this, if you want other aspects of this to be talked to on this podcast, as this is always helpful for me to hear. And with that, I'm gonna remind you again to go and download the free boundary setting roadmap. The link is in the description of the episode. That is important. It's an incredible tool and it's going to help you immensely. So if you haven't yet, do that. And yeah, with that, I'm going to wish you a wonderful week. Lots of love and bye for now.